If we've been hurt as an adult and we know where it happened and we know generally kind of why it happened, we then can make sense of that and adjust our environment. But when we've been hurt before we have memories or at times where we don't really understand things, it really does kind of challenge our nervous system and our mind.
Hello and welcome. We're so glad you're tuning into the Taking Good Care show. I'm Dr. Andrew Wong, based in Toronto, Canada.
And I'm Dr. David St. Arnaud, based in Edmonton, Canada. We're two practicing psychologists with over a decade of experience each, working in a variety of settings and supporting diverse populations.
Thanks for joining us. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. While we're both practicing psychologists, our podcast is intended purely for educational and entertainment purposes. It's not a substitute for professional mental health care or treatment. If you're in need of support, we strongly encourage you to reach out to a licensed mental health professional in your area.
Good morning, Andrew.
Good morning, Dave. Another Friday, another recording Friday.
Yeah. Sun's shining over here. We got a brief little bit of sunshine and the rain's coming back. So just enjoying a bit of sunshine and the end of the school year for the kiddos.
Yep, end of the school yesterday. It was the last day. It is gloomy here. It was a thunderstorm last night, actually. That woke me up in the middle of the night. It's huge. But it's a Friday, so I'm in my casual t-shirt and trying to work less on a Friday now.
All right. Well, this is hopefully you still got your working brain on for this intense episode we have.
I will need it because we are talking about memory.
Yeah.
Look at that. Look at
Yeah.
that segue.
This has been something that I've been really even since my undergrad, just interested in. And the more and more I see this also in my practice. So we were talking about this a bit off air. Like, this is a huge topic and it probably could be a whole bunch of episodes. We're going to try to keep this pretty focused, talking about explicit and implicit memory, or conscious, unconscious memory, and play around with that a little bit. And then we'll also likely, go down some paths that we'll rein in and have further episodes on.
Yep. And I'll try to put on my school psychology hat a little bit and, integrate that into our discussion when it comes to learning in terms of school, perhaps. And like Dave was saying about, certain types of memories. At the same time, though, I just want to put it out there for the listeners. We're not neuropsychologists. We're not going to be talking much about parts of the brain, components of the brain, deficits, deficiencies when it comes to what's working and what's not working, what could be the cause of certain memory issues when it comes to different parts of the brain not working optimally. So that we leave for our neuropsychology peers who know those things a lot more, but we'll talk about it from more of a clinical psychology, school psychology aspect.
For sure, yeah, and even as we were talking beforehand, we can now do MRIs and we can do brain imaging and trying to sort out, like, if someone is having memory issues, like where that's actually coming from. Is it dementia, or is it anxiety or stress related or depression related? There's a lot of aspects that can affect our memory. So again, we're not neuropsychologists. We're not gonna, be explaining how specific components of the brain, and that's still like a big area of study. We're still learning a lot about how the parts of the brain interact with each other to either consolidate, form memories, or to recall memories. So yeah, with dementia and Alzheimer's, there's a lot of really smart people working on this part. And that's not what we're going to get into today.
Okay.
Maybe we'll bring an expert on and then we can
Yes.
get into it.
All right. Dave, where do you want to start?
Well, again, I want to just define those terms. So explicit memory, right? Or declarative memory. These are like personal experiences or facts that we typically think about memory as, right? Like, can you remember your 18th birthday? can you remember your first day of school? Can you like these kinds of like,
Mhm.
oh yeah, I can, and this is what happened, and this is, you can tell people the story of what happened in the past, right?
Yep.
Or the facts like what is the capital of Alberta or what is the capital of Canada? Those kinds of when we think about school, and you said like school-based learning,
Yep.
a lot of that is like, can we memorize facts and then be able to think about those facts and like that is a big part of our education system.
No, exactly. And I think one way I always remembered it, this is sort of like psychology 101 back in our undergrad, right? If you ever took a first year psychology course, you would have learned about these two types of memories, but it's like, can you explain it in a factual manner? If you, even if you've learned something, can you explain it back to your audience, to the person sitting across from you, of how you learned even how to solve a math problem? Right? That to me is that explicit memory. You can you can state it back now as a fact, and without doing it or showing it, perhaps, you can still explain it very well.
Well, and explaining or analyzing also adds another layer to it, right? And
Hmm.
some people can be really good at memorizing facts and
Hmm.
even like say phone numbers or bank numbers or
Yep.
credit card numbers, right? And
Yep.
when we look at that, it's like typically there's a range of where people fall, but being able to hold something in your short-term memory, right, in
Yep.
your working memory, and we've talked about this in other episodes, but this is how, typically these memories, these factual learning-based, school-based memories get formed is that we have to attend to it. We have to hold it in our working memory. We can even use strategies in our working memory to make it more likely that we'll be able to remember something. We can chunk information, we can chunk numbers together. Actually, I was just at the pool with my boys last weekend, and the new lockers have you put in your own code, and then you have to remember that code, and then you can get into the locker after. So you don't have to carry around a key or put a lock on it anymore, right? And the codes were four-digit codes, and my boys were like coming up with their own code, and I'm like, oh no, like if we forget this code we won't be able to get back in the locker, right?
Yes.
And so my one son said something like 1385, and I was like, oh, that's not an easy one for me to remember, right? But then I was like, okay, well let's do 1385. Can we remember that? And they were like, yeah, yeah, 1385. And so we were able to chunk those numbers and make it easier to recall a four-digit number, because really now it's a
Yep.
two-digit or a two chunks of information. So, and again, there's like tons of memory strategies like that out there.
Yep.
But if we go from working memory, then ideally it gets put into like a longer term memory, and sometimes like sleep helps with that, and there are other things
Yep.
that help with that. But then 2 days later to be, what was the code of the locker, right? We might not have that. Some of those memories that we can hold for a little while actually disappear, or not, we're not able to recall them without some kind of help.
Yeah. Oh, I just actually thought of another example of implicit and explicit memory. So I used to play the piano, or for a long time I played the piano. I don't think I have the greatest memory. Like, case in point, you can name off books and authors that you've read. I know I've read certain books, but I cannot name the author anymore. But with music, it was I can play from memory the piece from beginning to end. And a part of me, when I used to have to go to like competitions and performances, my fear was always, okay, I just know my fingers know what to do and where to go, but I don't know how and I don't know why.
Hmm.
Right? So this idea that when you watch like really good pianists and they're like, start from this row and this bar, like bar three, start from there, they're not starting from the beginning, but they know middle of the piece. I know how to play it. I know what the person asking me to do, what they're doing. And that to me is a semantic memory, or sorry, explicit memory, right? They know really well different parts of the piece of music that they're playing so that if someone says bar 25, start there, please, they can play it. Whereas for me, it was like, I can't start there. I have to start at the beginning again. And that's the only way my memory will work to the very end. And that's more of your implicit memory.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's like muscle memory, some
Yeah.
people call it, or like procedural memory. And another like classic example is riding a bike, right? Like how hard it is to learn to ride a bike, how it can take like a year or two for, even a child to go from training wheels to two wheels, right? It's not something that's easy. But once you've done it over and over again, your body almost just knows how to do it without you having to think that hard, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
piano, all of those things that you practice over and over again can move from explicit to implicit, right? And another example of implicit is like classical conditioning. So pairing two things together, and then there's an association between two unrelated things at times, right? So the ringing of a bell, that the Pavlov experiment that most psych minors or majors would be familiar with is ringing the bell and bringing food out to the dog. And then they realized that just ringing the bell without the food, the dog
Mhm.
was already salivating, right? Like
That's
there was
right.
an expectation, there was a connection between this bell and food. And, I was even thinking about kids at school, right? The bell that goes off at recess, right? Eventually, that sound of that bell, by the time you're in a, grade one, grade two, you you don't like the kid isn't going to go, why is that noise happening? Right? It's like, oh yeah, that means we go back into the school, or that means we come out of the school. But if you rang that kind of bell for a kid that wasn't familiar with our school system, there would be no connection to that. There would just be
Yeah.
like, that's a noise, that's a sound.
And I think as you really master something, right? This is where implicit and explicit memory you have that interplay, right? What was once just muscle memory, you have now that higher order thinking in order to explain, oh, this is actually what I'm doing. I get it now, right? I understand why I'm acting or behaving a certain way after being conditioned to do it. And then you can also go the other way around where I understand the theory of it now, and now I have to apply it, right? So now I have to act on it. I have to, go into procedural mode. It's sort of like I'm guessing like if you're a surgeon, for example, you can't just study it, right? And then think, oh, I'm going to master my very first surgery, right? No, you have to go and practice over and over and over again so that you can combine theory and what you might be able to explain to people in an explicit way to now it's just muscle memory when you go into the operating room.
Yeah, and I mean, as I'm listening to you, it's like physical tasks, right, might require that kind of like you can't just learn about it in a book and understand the concept of doing the physical task. There's something about actually doing the exercise. And even, even therapy, right? Or even like the men's group. I often tell people like I'm giving an intro of what the group is about so that people have an idea of what they're joining or they're going to be doing so that it's informed consent. But I also say like the best way to kind of understand what this is about is to be a part of it, to participate in it. You will then have an experience that allows you to understand it. So, oh, and the reason I the reason I wanted to talk about this and that this is something that it might not come up it might not be something that I'm talking to clients about, but it's something that is in my mind in terms of understanding behavior, understanding behavioral change.
Well, a lot of the time, though, I think your point about like classical conditioning, right? The importance of classical conditioning in many aspects of our lives, and because of what I do in my professional life, working with kids and teachers and education system, a lot of the education system, or even how kids perceive the world, is based on conditioning, right? So, as I was talking about this with my daughter probably sometime this winter, but she would pick up on certain cues from the teacher, right? So as you've gotten to know the teacher from September to, let's say, I don't know, February, you pick up on tendencies. So the way a teacher might say, "All right, everyone," you already sort of know the tone, how he started the the sentence there. You sort of get a sense of what's coming next, right?
Mm.
So that conditioning of, okay, he's going to complain about us, or okay, he's going to ask us to open up the books next, right? That's conditioning right there.
Yeah. Actually, an example of that too, like on a more of a difficult one is like people that have grown up in an alcoholic home where one of the parents was drinking a lot. They tend to, not everyone, but they tend to be really sensitive to those cues and being able to pick up on, how other people are doing because for a lot of people, they needed to know that. They needed to know whether their parent was drinking or not because that was going to affect how supper went or that was going to affect how bedtime went. And so learning those associations, those cues, and that's where this like implicit, explicit, like someone might not even be able to describe while they're doing it because they've been doing it since a child, right? And they just know that they feel stressed or they feel safe or they feel comfortable or uncomfortable, but they don't really know why. Right? And the neat thing about therapy is we can actually bring implicit memories that are subconscious, that are outside of our awareness, into our awareness, and then be able to look at them and talk about them and explore and experience them.
Well, I think we're even getting into this idea now as you're talking about the subconscious and the conscious, how some people, because of how painful certain memories are, there can be a real visceral reaction to it when you talk about conditioning. Even the thought of that memory could be an abusive parent, for example, abusive caregiver, where maybe that caregiver has already passed away, but even just the memory, the thought of it brings on a very physical or visceral reaction, that conditioned response. And, for many years, it's just been suppressed, right? You consciously keep it down.
Yeah, or you don't even have the memory, like you don't have the explicit memory, so you're not conscious. Not everyone is consciously
Mhm,
trying to keep it out of their
mhm.
mind. They actually don't even remember it happening. Maybe it happened before. Like oftentimes we don't have a lot of explicit memory before age 4, 5, right? But we know there's a lot that happens in our life
Yeah.
early on.
And this is why when I work with many parents, kids are very attuned to reactions of adults. This idea of conditioning, like when it's a parent's certain tone, a certain phrase that they like to use, even a nonverbal gesture, right? The way someone looks. If it's been done over and over again, children know what's coming next. And so oftentimes when I'm doing some parent coaching, it's talking about breaking that connection, breaking the expectation, the expected thing that's coming next to catch the child off guard. Because when children know what's coming next and they've been conditioned over and over and over again, they also put on their armor and they say, "Okay, let's bring it," right? I know what's going to happen, so I'm going to fight this till the very end. Let's go, right? But if we can break that circuit, then hopefully it leads to better outcomes.
Yeah, and there's two like terms that come to mind when you're saying that. It's like relearning, right?
Hmm.
Unlearning or reconditioning or deconditioning. I don't think
Hmm.
that's really a term in this word, but it makes sense. And so the term that actually is used is extinguishing. So
Yes.
extinguishing something that has been conditioned. And so what we know about that, actually, don't quote me on this because I don't have this in front of me, but I still remember from my undergrad course this experiment with the single cell amoeba, like this single celled organism that doesn't have like a complex brain that we have, right? So this is kind of like at its most primitive level what kind of learning can happen. And
Yep.
they had, do you remember, are you familiar with this one?
Yep. Yep.
Okay. So
Yep.
fill me in if I'm getting it wrong. But basically they they poked it or they brought a hot needle close to it that would create some kind of pain or adversive reaction. So
Yeah.
so touching it with that hot needle, uh, the single-celled amoeba would like recoil and get really tight to like move away from it, right? And so then when they later brought that same needle without it being hot, without it being painful, the the amoeba did the same thing. It had learned that this creates pain, so this is how I constrict and keep myself alive and reduce the pain, right?
Yes. Yes.
But what's interesting is how many times after that that the needle needed to be applied without any heat, without any pain for that single-celled amoeba to learn to be like, well, actually, I don't need to recoil anymore. This actually
Yeah.
doesn't hurt me anymore.
Yep.
But it took far more experiences of no pain. And
Hmm.
I don't remember the specific number, but it was a lot. And adding to that was when they reintroduced the pain and put that hot needle back, that so all of that extinguishing or unlearning of a previously learned thing came back really quickly and was harder to extinguish after.
So this is so interesting, right? Because we then talk about from a single celled amoeba, like something so simple, right? And then now we're talking about more complex organisms. I mean, there's been so many, classic experiments done with animals and dogs and rats, right? That have looked into all sorts of different types of conditioning. And then when you think about humans, right? When you let's say talk about trauma,
Mhm.
right? You've experienced something over and over and again. And then maybe for one moment, whatever that trauma is, maybe it's with another person and that person treats you well. And you're like, oh, everything's better. Right. But then again, it falls back into old patterns and habits. And again, more trauma. Right. So as you're talking about this single-celled amoeba, you know, uh, it's harder and harder to extinguish certain behaviors. Same thing with human beings. Right? You have certain experiences, they're horrible experiences. You don't want to relive them again. You think things are getting better, and then things nosedive. It's very, very challenging.
Yeah, I frequently reflect on that single cell amoeba study because, let's say for example, we'll go back to like someone in the house who's got an alcohol problem, right? If you're a child and you don't even know what alcohol is, right? And you don't understand that the reason the behavior of the caregiver is so different, right? it, we're trying to make connections and understand, is it something I did? Is it something wrong with like what is going on? And if it's inconsistent, that is really going to be hard to extinguish, right? Because it, there is no pattern. It's not like, oh, today I'm safe and tomorrow I'm not, right? So that's why it is like our nervous system operates far quicker than our prefrontal cortex. So our explicit understanding and memory is a lot slower than our nervous system or our implicit memories that can get formed from experience.
Yep, yep. And with those experiences too, as a from coming from a child's perspective, like you mentioned, you may not even know why your caregiver is coming home so angry,
Yeah.
right? And you all you may know is that, you know what? It's a Wednesday night or it's a Wednesday, I'm gonna go home. And, this particular caregiver doesn't come home till later on a Wednesday night, right? And, for those hours when you're at home, you're just preparing your nervous system for whatever's may happen, right? But you have no idea why,
Mhm.
right? So there's no reason that you can understand as a child. You just know that something bad may happen.
Yeah. And even a lot of adults that come into the office, they have no idea why their nervous system is operating the way it is, right?
Yeah.
And it could be a smell, it could be a sound, it could be the lighting. There's a lot of things that once we look at just like simple classical conditioning and associations, right? Then it helps us understand. Again, with that single cell amoeba, it's like the constriction that happens, right? When we've been hurt, our bodies constrict, our nervous system goes into a certain state of survival, right? But a lot of this happens below our conscious awareness. If we've been hurt as an adult and we know where it happened and we know who did it and we know like generally kind of why it happened, we then can like make sense of that and adjust our environment. But when we've been hurt before we have memories or yeah, at times where we don't really understand things, it really does kind of challenge our nervous system and our mind to kind of operate in a quote unquote kind of normal manner or like in a healthy range of what they like dorsal vagal or like what we call social engagement, right? Where we can kind of be in relationship with other people and we can rest and digest, we can recover from things. So I know I'm going on a bit of a tangent again. So I'll rein it back in.
No, I think, even with this discussion about memory, it's so interesting because oftentimes we think of memory as like, okay, how is this going to affect our work? How is it going to affect my academic performance? But I think what we're pointing out right now is that it can really impact our mental health, right? And I don't think many people think of that, memory is not just for learning, it's part of our mental health too. What are our experiences, for example, in past romantic relationships,
Mhm.
right? So let's say you've had three serious relationships and you're into your fourth relationship. There's no way that you can tell me that those three previous relationships have not impacted the way you are now functioning in your fourth relationship.
Mhm.
And that's from your memory, right? That's from your memory of how things have been carried out. Maybe they were not very good relationships, or right? Or maybe they were somewhat positive, but things went south. And you remember the reasons why things went south.
Yeah, and again, if we go back to like if you've been hurt, your memory of that is strong and it really like again from a survival perspective makes a lot of sense. And having positive experiences after are not really as impactful. They they might help you start to extinguish or unlearn, right? But you
Yeah.
could be in like a couple good relationships and still be afraid to be hurt the way you were hurt in that other relationship, right?
And I'll come from a different perspective too, because I've worked with a number of clients who have also come from this particular angle where they have been in good relationships. But again, things didn't work out, not for them. They wanted things to work out. But now, as they're embarking on another relationship, they're worried, right? They're scared and they can't let go of that past relationship,
Hmm.
right? Even though something can be really positive in front of them.
Hmm.
So again, from a different perspective, that, I wanted that relationship and I want my future relationship to be like that and not being able to let go of the past.
Well, I think that's why, even a lot of the self-help books and like you said, like learning something intellectually doesn't always translate, right? We can learn to work on our self-esteem, right? And we can have things that we say to ourselves, right? That are positive and we're
Mhm.
doing the right things intellectually, but emotionally and implicitly or subconsciously, it takes a while. I think about this like from a top-down perspective. We can learn something in our brain, and it takes a while for that to translate into a felt experience or a change in the nervous system.
I know we talked about acceptance probably a few episodes ago now as we're recording this. And we get clients who will say, you know what, I don't want to remember that, or I just want to wipe that out of my memory. Right. And clients, sometimes we embark on certain discussions where they're like, well, it sounds like you're just asking me to like forget something and I can't forget. Right. And it's interesting that that's sort of the perception. And oftentimes, if I get a remark like that, I will say, no, I'm not expecting you to wipe that out of your memory. In fact, that's probably impossible.
Hmm.
Right. But how do we perhaps sort of accept that experience or that memory for what it is?
Yeah, or just like the whole phrase of move on, get over it, right? And or people will say, oh, like that happened a long time ago. I don't need to talk about my childhood. Like, that's over and done with. And on some level, yeah, you're right. You have had other experiences. Maybe those previous experiences don't matter that much, right? But if we think about that single cell amoeba, if we could actually speak to it and be like, don't worry about it. Like, get over it. It's not going to happen again. Look at all of these like new kind of needles that are not painful, right? It takes a while for like our other learning nervous system that is making associations to unlearn something,
Yep.
right?
Yep. Like first we have to break certain neurocircuits before we can create new ones.
And yeah, and I don't even know if they're all in our brain, right? Like there's some research too, just looking at memories within cells, right? And so sometimes we think, yeah, we have to relearn or rewire our brain. You hear that a lot, right?
Yep.
These like neurons that fire together, wire together. That helps explain classical conditioning, right?
Yep.
And it helps, but some of this is like maybe outside of our awareness, or it doesn't even need to be consciously unlearned, that we could pair two other things together that are pleasurable, right?
Hmm.
That maybe were painful before and start to let our body know that it's actually okay, that it is safe. And again, that could be like with a smell, right?
Yeah.
That could be lighting, that could be, yeah, a lot of the physical sensation, five
Yep.
senses stuff.
Well, actually, when you bring up something like food, for example, that's one that often resonates with people. Many people like this idea that certain smells or tastes bring back memories. I mean, and you hear that all the time, right? Like you can talk to somebody and say, "Oh, this particular food reminds me of when I was, 10 years old and we were in this country," or like my grandmother or grandparents cooking,
Mm.
right? That's how strong our memories are. And again, I know we're not supposed to speak of like the brain components, but just from research, that pathway where taste and smell goes is actually very close to where classically we think of memories are stored, So and where emotions are also triggered. So emotions and smells and tastes and memories all come together in our brain, So it's such an interesting uh neural circuit when we think about these things.
Yeah, and just like, you talk about food, but our olfactory, like our nose, right? Like is actually a lot of our taste comes from scent, right? And that we know that for memories, like scents are really strong. Like they can evoke or recall memories. And so even just think about like freshly cooked bread or cookies, right? Even
Mhm.
when you're trying to sell your house, the advice is like cook some cookies, put them in the oven, and then like people coming in will have a positive connection to your place, right? If they've had a positive connection to cookies, if they like cookies, right, and they like the smell of cookies, they might pair that with your home and be like, oh, this place feels really cozy and really warm and really nice, right? So
Yes.
there's like sales tactics that we can use to kind of exploit these neurocircuits, right? And but I'd say the opposite too. Like someone's cologne or perfume of someone that has hurt you, that can bring up, and it might not be a conscious memory, but it can be like, "Ooh, I hate that smell," or "I don't like that. I get panicky when I smell that smell."
Well, I was gonna say, I that sales tactic could backfire, if someone has a negative memory with cookies,
Mhm,
right? So,
mhm. Yeah, and that's why these things are individualistic. There are some common patterns, some common trends, and we could, talk about those. So that's why actually in my office, the lighting, there's a whole bunch of like psychology and like should we have soft lighting? Like what kind of
yes.
lighting is going to be most conducive for people to do therapy, right? And I've heard some psychologists say like, "Ooh, low lighting, that's creepy." Like I wouldn't like that. So there's an association with low lighting being creepy, right? And for other people, it actually might be kind of nice, right? And so we assume we have these assumptions, we have these ideas, but a lot of it is based on our own experience, right? And so I think like being trauma informed, when you have someone in your office, you're going to say, take a minute, look around, right? I can adjust the lighting. How is the lighting for you, right?
Right.
And so
Right.
I've been fortunate that I can turn off the bright, you know, fluorescent lights in my office and use a lamp, or I could have the bright lights. And so being able to adjust to the other person, and they might be like, oh, this is weird. Like, why are you asking me so many questions about this? It's like, okay, well, that's fine, right? If these aren't issues for you, if these aren't concerns for you, then I don't need to spend a lot of time on it. But there are certain people that are really sensitive to their environment. And unless you allow that to be discussed, someone could be in fight or flight or freeze response. They're already triggered. They're already super activated. They're not in a right place to even be meeting with you to have to discuss even starting therapy because their nervous system is just completely fired.
I'm smiling only because when you're talking about the lighting, I've actually never had a client complain about the mood lighting, like the low lighting and just like, the dimly lit lights. But only once did I ever have a child who actually fell asleep.
But you calling it mood lighting, right, already means, right? Like are you like we've associated this to a type of mood connected to the type of lighting.
Yes.
And in a different
And
culture with different experience, like it's just, yeah, this is why this is so fascinating to me.
yeah, yeah. And for that one child, he's associated with sleep.
Yeah,
I remember calling the parent back and like, yeah, I think he fell asleep.
great. He felt comfortable, right? So comfortable that he could fall asleep. Yeah.
And funny enough, talking about memory, like whenever he comes back, he talks about, the time he fell asleep.
Oh man, this reminds me of I don't know, it's not released yet, but our episode that we talk about like going to the dentist and getting a toy or going
Yeah,
to a
yeah, yeah, yeah.
psychologist's office and getting some kind of a toy or getting like a something to drink like a juice or a pop. Like
Hmm.
essentially we're creating a positive association if the child likes these things, right?
Yeah,
And we
yeah.
do this all the time without consciously even naming it, I think.
Oh, I love going to my orthodontist because he had Nintendos at like every bay. It was
Yeah.
like, that's my video game time.
Yeah, of course.
So no, the memories are so important, even in the therapy setting, and that's why we really try to make it a positive experience for kids too, right? Whether it's with all the fidget toys that we have in the clinic, as well as, something for them to take away, and just everybody being friendly, because that's what they remember.
Well, yeah, again, and like just really highlighting the difference between explicit and implicit memories.
Yeah,
People might not be able to describe what they like about the place, right? Maybe it's video games. I like playing video games. They have video games. Okay, that's explicit.
yeah.
But if it's like, I don't know, there's just something about this person or there's just something about this place that I like, that might be more of an implicit level.
Oh, for sure.
This brings up another like way old time classic study that anyone again will be familiar with if you've done any psychology undergrad course. So there was someone who was not able to form new memories, right? So think about like dementia or Alzheimer's at its progressive stages. There's really like a really difficult time. So you meet someone and they introduce themselves and then they come back the next day and there is no memory of this person, right? They have
Hmm.
to reintroduce themselves every time. So nothing gets moved from short-term to long-term memory anymore. But what they did in this experiment is the doctor that was meeting with this patient and he would never be able to do this anymore, right? This would not pass any ethics boards of, when you're trying to get a study approved by ethics. Uh, but back in the day, they were able to do things like this. So he put a tack in his hand, and when he shook the patient's hand, the tack like poked him, right? So there was pain from actually like physical, like being poked with a needle, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And what they found in the study was that even though this person could not recognize this person or describe what they didn't like about this person, what they saw is the patient wouldn't put their hand out to shake hands anymore. So on some level, they learned that if they did that, they would get hurt. But could they explain it? No.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I never heard about that, but that's so interesting that, it's sort of like this idea of like the primitive brain, you know, again, going back to sort of simple organisms. In a way, when we think of our brain, there's sort of the new brain and the old brain, that hind brain, that area of the brain is sort of thought as the old brain that's coming from the brainstem and those sort of primitive areas, cognitive areas. And there is sort of that old brain functioning, right? Like I just simply remember that that was not a good experience. I can't explain why, but I just know I'm not going to shake anyone's hands anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. Or specifically this one person, right?
Yeah.
Like there was a learning that happened that wasn't conscious. And so when we think about kids, right, and how often we, at least back in the day, we would force kids to, hug certain people or sit on someone's lap and I think now knowing more about this, we might be able to trust kids if they say, I don't, I don't like this person, right? And they can't explain why. They don't have the words, they don't have the ability, but maybe we start to listen to them a little bit differently than like, this is what we do. This is, don't be disrespectful.
I'm laughing because this reminds me a couple of weeks ago, I was coaching at my son's baseball tournament. And there was this one player on our team, and we were trying to shift things up. So we were like, okay, go play back catcher. And at the tournament, like these umps are really good. And there was this one umpire who really wanted every single player to crouch behind home plate. Like he's like, at this level, you should be getting used to crouching behind home plate. I know the ball's coming in fast, but like just really try to catch it. You've got the gear, it's not going to hurt. And this one particular player kept flinching. And they always say in back catcher, don't flinch because when you flinch, that's when the ball hits you. And so he kept flinching. And of course, he gets hit hard in the arm. I heard it. And so he comes off the field. He's in tears, and we have to substitute him. And now he's like, I'm not gonna play home plate. I'm not playing back catcher anymore because he remembers like this guy made me do it, and the outcome was negative. And so even as a coach now, I sort of joke with him. I was like, "Hey, it's your turn to play back catcher. Go." He's like, "No, I'm not playing back catcher." And I sort of have a smile on my face, but it's like he associates that now with that tournament and getting hit by multiple pitches, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, again, we can scan our own memory. We can just kind
Yeah.
of reflect back on the times where we got hurt as a kid or as a teenager or even as an adult, right? And the way that, like even you were talking earlier about breakups and relationships, right? Right after a bad breakup where someone is really hurt, they often are like, I'm never dating again. I'm never, doing this again. This is just
Mhm.
like, it's a not natural reaction. And
Yeah. Clinically speaking, I think, this is why I always tell my clients, teenagers and adults mostly, I will give the message that this is why we're all unique, right? Everybody who comes through that door to my office comes in with a different story. because we all have unique experiences. We all have different memories of these experiences, and we have different interpretations of these memories, right?
Hmm.
So I think that's why I really love this field because we get to work with people who come from different backgrounds, different stories, unique stories, and it's almost like untangling that story to truly understand somebody to help them.
Yeah, I think there once you understand the dynamics of this or the mechanics of it, I think it helps with compassion, it helps with understanding, and people might be more frustrated with their own lack of progress, right? It's like, why can't I just get over this? Right? Well, because the way our nervous system is wired, right? And so, this is kind of an extreme example, but uh, let's say someone was abused at a church, right? And they want to attend that church. They want to go back as an adult. It's part of their faith. And, but they always have a really strong nervous system reaction. And they're like, I know I'm safe. I know I'm an adult now. I know this, like, but, think about the like incense or the different smells that are like associated with a place. Think about the sounds, right? There's so many sensory things that are unique that might be really positive associations for some people, right? But for other people, and they just are really like struggling with why they still have this negative reaction when things are
Exactly.
actually different.
I think this is why, and I'm sure you've seen this in your office before too. We get clients who they're very rational. They know what they should be doing. They know what the right responses are. They know that, like you said, certain environments should be safe, right? But they really haven't processed their experience on a deeper emotional level, right? So even though they understand, okay, this institution should be safe or this hospital should be a safe place for me to go to, they've had that negative experience and they'll say, oh, I know it shouldn't happen again. I know it was a one-off thing, but on a deeper level, it's impacted them more than they think.
Yeah, and we're not even, I mean, we can even later, but uh like how we're actually able to take in new information, right? And we're not a single cell amoeba. Like we are a pretty complicated system, and we have all kinds of strategies where we might experience something but not take it in, not really
Hmm.
even think that it's real, right? And
Hmm.
so
Hmm.
we're not going to unlearn something or relearn something if we're in that kind of a state.
Yeah. And this is where, again, counseling therapy can be really helpful in terms of just receiving that guidance of how to understand our unique experiences or how to reframe, that all important word, reframe our experiences and our interpretations so that perhaps we can come from a place of growth, a place of resilience. And we haven't, I think we talked about this very briefly in a past episode on trauma, but this idea of post-traumatic growth, right? Like we're always going to have that memory, we're always going to have that experience, but how can I see it as a place of learning, as a place of resilience?
Yeah, at least learning about yourself and the way your own nervous system, your own, triggers or the things that bother you are the things that comfort you, right? And building that kind of map for yourself. And again, we're getting better and better at being trauma informed, and I think this is where we have not been very good at it before, right? We would think, oh, well, mindfulness is good and we need to do like 20 minutes of this, but 1 minute of it might be too much for someone. And even the other thing about generalization, as humans, we can generalize. And so I think about this in my office all the time. Like, what are people's associations with a middle-aged white male, right? What are people's associations with psychology or a professional with credentials? And a very simple one that I was not aware of growing up, but like residential schools, right? Someone's experience in residential schools and how maybe coming to my office might remind them of that, right? In terms of authority, in terms of institution. And then we say like, oh, well, why are these people like not trustworthy, or like why don't they like the education system or the healthcare system, or like these are just other institutions. So if you've been harmed by an institution and we understand that, and then how do we have corrective experiences, and what does that actually look like, and how long that can take to repair harm that was done, a long time ago for some people, but is still like hardwired.
Exactly. So it's such an in-depth topic, this idea of memory and experiences and interpretations of those memories. I think we could go on and on, but I think for any listeners listening to this episode, and I think that's my highlight is, our memories do inform us of a lot of our current experiences and how we react and how we interpret certain things. And, for anybody who has had a traumatic past, I think it's very important, if you think it's impacting you today, to seek out the help, so that we can understand ourselves better and understand our history a little bit better.
Yeah, and I think for me, a summary is this, like we overemphasize explicit memory, right? Our learning skills, our reading self-help books, and taking in, you know, like information from a logical perspective. We underestimate how powerful our implicit memories are, and I think most people have heard this before. Like most of our communication is nonverbal. This explains it because the words we're saying might be that explicit part, but the implicit part of like nonverbal, body position, or like all of the environmental or circumstantial, or like all of these other aspects that our nervous system, our brain is taking in, but might not be conscious of it. Right. And it's based on past experience. It's based on like, so I think more and more we are going to be focusing on this in therapy. We're going to focus on this in terms of recovery and healing from trauma, from even just like natural disasters and horrible things that happen in the world that we don't really fully, I think, put the appropriate amount of weight in terms of like how we absorb and learn things unconsciously.
Very well put, Dave. Very well put. So I'm sure we're going to have more discussion about this in the future. There's so much more to flesh out, but at the end of the day, I think almost everything is associated with our memory and our past experiences. So on that note, if you are enjoying our podcast, our episodes, please do subscribe, follow, give us a thumbs up, ask questions, leave comments. It's always appreciated. I know a lot of our comments right now are sort of through our connections, whether it's from work and so on. But if anyone in the public wants to leave us a comment, by all means.
Yeah, take care, Andrew. Take care, the listeners, and take care of yourself. Take care of those around you. Hopefully, this, have a little more compassion for yourself, and maybe even a little more curiosity about why you might have the reactions you have that you don't really have the words for. So, be curious, and hopefully that helps you on your healing journey.
Take care, everyone.